affirming to yourself, either through your thoughts or actually verbalizing, the things that you need to hear. So things like, I am worthy. If you go into a client meeting and there's a deep set subconscious feeling that you are unworthy to be there, to do that work, to have that responsibility, to charge that money, if you feel that, it's going to come through in your entire presence. Whereas if you tell yourself, I am worthy of this work, and you really embody that, it's quite a powerful thing to do.
Hello and welcome back to the Edit Undo podcast. As you know, I am your host Alfie, and we've got a great guest that we are going to speak to today, specifically for all the solopreneurs, creatives, and freelancers out there. This one is for you. I'm really excited for this because I think I've experienced a lot of the challenges that we're going to discuss today. So Matt, thank you very much for making the time to chat with us today, and welcome to the show.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks, Alfie. Nice to be here.
Cool. So, we'll definitely step into your story, but I think maybe before we do that, we can just chat a little bit about, very briefly, what it is that you're doing at the moment, and kind of why you actually got into it.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a business coach for freelancers, specifically individual workers within the creative sector. So that's web designers, developers, copywriters, graphic designers, etc. Anybody who's kind of putting their skills to use to, be creative in the world, find creative solutions to problems and to make stuff. I've done that myself for the vast majority of my career, working as a web designer. And one thing I've learned over the years is that there's a lot of potential within the sector, I think, that is untapped. And that is because a lot of the challenges that we face in business as individuals is, really kind of leaning into the mindset that helps us to talk about money, manage clients and projects, generate leads for our businesses. We're really good at bringing to the table those core skills of being good at Illustrator or being a good programmer in PHP. These things are kind of, these are what we do, right? But all of the stuff that goes along with that, the raft of other skills that are needed to really tap into our potential to do the best work for ourselves and for our clients, a lot of people are unequipped to deal with that sort of stuff. They don't have those the confidence to really dig into that. So my coaching is about helping those people. And when I say those people, I'm talking about me, literally 5-10 years ago, because I've been through this sort of stuff. And I'm very passionate about that. And the people I work with now, they can confidently go back to their existing clients and ask for more money to increase their rates. They can be more ambitious in the proposals that they're putting out there. They no longer see themselves as the caterers to small businesses because they've got big ideas, but they were unrealized before. And from working with me and going through that coaching process, it really helps to lift the lid on what's possible for them and for their work. So it's a fantastic space to be in, and I'm very happy to be doing it. And, I still practice web development, web design myself as well. So I've still got my kind of business there that it kind of helps to keep me sort of one foot in that world. So I'm still keeping up with what's going on there, which I think is useful for informing the coaching practice as well.
Yeah.
I really like that you introduced yourself and you said, you're a business coach for creatives, essentially, because generally speaking, we separate creatives and business. It's always two separate entities. And I think it's very important. And I think almost any creative can relate here that if we had to pinpoint something we all struggle with, because it's probably not part of our creative career or creative, actually, if you think back to our studies, the creative processes honed in on, and we focus on our niche and our craft, but there's no real business subject or, okay, cool, now you are a craft skilled creative stepping into the world as an adult, conversing in business with people as a creative. How do you actually do that? That's one thing we don't really get as creatives, or essentially, or I'm speaking for myself at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And because it's not taught in formal education, and if it is, it's taught from a very sort of kind of a practical way of looking at things. So, maybe hire an accountant, get some invoicing software, those kind of practices, which are all good. But what they don't tap into is that sense of like leadership that entrepreneurs and business owners have. Business owners, generally, they set up a business because they want to bring some sort of vision to life. They want to have some kind of impact in the world. And I find a lot of creative freelancers, and again, going back to myself, when I started freelancing in 2009, that was my first sort of go at it. I came to the market with very much a mindset of, I am a web designer, and therefore the little cog that I was that sat perfectly well in an agency, when you take the machinery away from that cog, all is left is the little cog. And I was just like this little cog in the world without anything around me. And I think there's a mindset jump from being that cog to, if you follow what I'm going at here, to building that machinery around you, which is the business, which is the vision, which is the impact that you want to have in the world. And so many of us have this in us, but nobody's really asking the questions. No one's really asking us, what are we doing this for? A lot of freelancers will tell you that they've gone self-employed so that they can have more control over their time, earn a bit more money, work with whoever they want to work with, and all this sort of stuff. And that's all good. Like, these are good reasons to go freelance. But what is missing is, okay, what about the wider world? Who are the businesses that you are helping specifically? And what are the challenges that you're supporting them to fix specifically? What's your vision? So it's about building out, like I said, that machinery. So, you are a business owner. Excuse me, you are a business owner, not just a web designer, a graphic designer, a copywriter, etc.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And, I'm really hoping in this discussion we can get to some of the, practical elements that you sort of take on to help your clients get there. But maybe before we do, can you give us a bit of an idea of, let's roll the clock back and give us an idea of how you actually got into this space? Because I think it's not a very typical niche. This is encountering you was the first time I'd ever come across a business coach focusing specifically on creative freelancing. So how did that come to be?
Yeah, I think if we go back probably about 4 or 5 years, I decided one day that I was really tired of being a web designer for any company, for anyone big or small. I struggled to get excited about the vast array of different projects I was working on. And a lot of people enjoy that variety. That's cool. I did for a part of time, but then it got to the point where I wanted more of a foundation to the business. And I also wanted more of a sense of purpose about why I was doing what I was doing. So I decided to niche down and start working with small charities. So these are charities that have an income of less than $1 million a year. That accounts for about 90% of the third sector in the UK. To do that, I realized that once I had that proposition in place, I was then faced with this challenge of, okay, how do I actually make this happen? And straight away, I realized I had to start putting myself out there. I realized I had to, maybe start making videos, maybe start speaking at events, maybe start doing some cold outreach. The kind of things that I think a lot of people shy away from. We stay in our comfort zone, our safety zone. We avoid doing this sort of stuff. But the vision that I had for that business meant that I had no choice other than to step out of that comfort zone. So that's really what sort of kicked off the journey and started it for me. And delving into the world of sort of self-development was quite a powerful thing to do. The first book that I read was one called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, because I knew that I was feeling the fear, but I had to do it anyway, right? I had to do these things in order to make what I wanted to happen. So yeah, it's been just a journey on that, really. And I got to a point in the business a couple of years in where I had a number of clients. I'd reached that sort of 6-figure level of income over the course of a year, which was phenomenal. And I had not expected that to happen. It happened because I was practicing all this good stuff and I was really delivering for my clients. And I started learning about coaching because I wanted to have better conversations with my clients. I found that coaching is really good for getting to the heart of sort of problems and hesitations and stuff. Whereas before I may have been very eager to rush in there with a solution, with an answer, and kind of talk about my opinion quite a lot. What coaching enables you to do is step back and listen and challenge in a really positive way. So that's what I started doing with my clients. And then it was only a few months into that I realized, oh wow, actually this is an epiphany moment. I could apply these same skills to people in my sector and help them to do in a way what I've managed to do in my own journey. So that kind of brings us to date, really.
Yeah.
I love that. You mentioned a little bit about, what your coaching entails, but I want to go a little bit further, especially for everyone listening that wants to get to know you more as a coach. What is your coaching style? Is it like one-on-one video calls? Is it a series of 12 sessions we have to do? Or what does your coaching look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is one-to-one calls, definitely. There is a general trajectory within the coaching sector that you move from one-to-ones to group coaching. And I don't know what the future looks like for me. I guess in terms of impact and scale, the groups would make sense. But right now I'm at a one-to-one stage and I absolutely love it. It's 90-minute sessions every week over a 10-week period. So it's really intense and it is ideally for people that are at a crossroads. Maybe they've just gone freelance and they have £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 in their bank, kind of a buffer, and they're ready to invest in themselves in order to take it to that next level. And it's really interesting. I found that the sweet spot tends to be people in their sort of mid-30s that are more at that crossroads. I'm not sure why that is, but it's just an interesting observation that I've had. I'm not saying that is true across the board, but particularly in our sector at this time, there seems to be people that have done quite a lot for a while and now they're ready to do something a bit more serious. And they know, like I did back then, that they need to do something to make that happen.
That's amazing. And I think it's important because, both Steph and I are sort of heading in that direction, or rather to that point in our lives. And, maybe the fact that the both of us sort of have switched the companies that we were working at pretty recently from being a small cog in a very big machine to being maybe a bigger cog in a smaller machine. But really sort of being able to have more impact in the work that you're doing. And I think that's something that comes up in a lot of creatives' experience because, at the beginning of your career, whether you go work for an agency or you're working, let's say, in the financial sector, doing design there or whatever it might be, the first thing that you want to do is basically learn about how like what it means to be a working person, what kind of businesses are out there, what different industries speak to you. And then you eventually get comfortable within that, and then you almost become like a knowledgeable or like you find like sort of a skill set that you're proficient at. But then I feel like there comes a point where you're almost like, okay, I've got the skill set, but I want to do something. Like I want to make a difference. And for me, and I'm saying that because I experience this quite personally, it's like there comes a point where you're like, you know, it doesn't matter how beautiful the websites I design are or how great the graphics that I produce are, if they're not actually doing anything and they're not actually getting out there into the world and creating an impact in somebody's life. And I feel like that's for me is one of the reasons why I made that shift. And maybe that's an indication as to why people sort of reach at that stage of around like your 30s or heading in that direction where you want to find a way to make a little bit of impact. And so I wanted to maybe pick your brain a little bit, because one of the things that you sort of mentioned that you did is a term that I've only heard for the first time, and you know maybe it's just you know the lexicons are a little bit different, but the idea of niching down, like finding a space where you want to fit in. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of finding a niche specifically for freelancers or solopreneurs?
Yeah, sure. And just to pick up on something you said there about the graphics and how they look and how it feels, like I completely agree with you that if it doesn't have some sort of, if it doesn't resonate in some way with a business objective, a user objective, then, you know, what is it for? And I guess the answer to that would be, it's for me as a designer. So I think there's a maturing process as a designer from, I would say actually an artist to a designer. Because if an artist does things for themselves and a designer does things for others, you know, is one way of looking at it. So if we still keep that energy in ourselves to do this work, like we need that. So even if you produce something and it is absolutely useless in the world, if you got a lot of fulfillment from creating something, then that is an amazing thing to have. If it does have an impact as well, then that's also an amazing thing. And I think to come back to your question about niching there, in a way, it's kind of like the bringing together of those two worlds. It's something that is meaningful to me, but it's also meaningful to others, and having a shared set of objectives around that work. So when I chose to work with small charities in particular, because I'd been to a few events in my local area whereby charities would talk about their impact, and you know, it was like literally hairs on the back of my neck stuff, right? Really, really inspiring stories. And I'd worked with a couple of charities as well, just by chance, that had just sort of come into my orbit, and I took on the work. And that gave me a whole different view of what it was to be a web developer, to be a designer, to be in the creative sector. It kind of forced me to ask the question of myself of, you know, what is all this for? Like, yeah, sure, as I said earlier, it's for me, in that I can earn money, I can take time off when I want, I don't have a boss to answer to. But yeah, certainly, I think as you go through your career, and possibly just as a result of aging, you start to ask the bigger questions and also think about your legacy. Like, this is something that, you know, a lot of people who are young, they don't think about legacy because they don't think about being old or the next generation or being remembered or anything like that. But I think in terms of niching, you know, you can go 10 years and do nothing in terms of niching. You can just work with anyone and everyone. And just, in a way, it's that Steve Jobs quote that says you have to trust that the dots will join. I don't know if you've heard of that address that he made at that college speech that he did. And it's about, in a way, looking back through your career at a certain point and your life more generally and seeing what were those important things that happened, and then trying to find, you're joining them together and trying to find a thread that means something to you that you can then use as a guiding path forward.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
That's amazing.
I think
That's very cool.
it really makes me think about, the recent decision I made, for instance, to start this new job as well. If I spent enough time reflecting on my own journey to connect those dots and see, what are some of the themes, the values I see that I invest in my creative process or creative journey, and where do I see it then going forward. But instead, I think generally if we think about creative career paths, it's not a very mature discipline or profession. And I think maybe because of that, we have this very templatized idea of what our creative career should look like. And most of the time when people reach mid or late 30s, you've gotten to the climax, right? You got the nice paycheck, you've got the creative director or the director term behind your name. So then we almost get to this crossroads of what next, because we almost looking ahead the whole time instead of also like pausing and reflecting what's meaning to me as a creative, looking back on our own journeys, making it personal rather than looking outwards to what does this templatized career path of a creative look like. I don't know, just thinking.
Yeah, I've never thought of it like that, but I totally understand where you're coming from. A templatized, yeah, it's the career ladder, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's always this idea that you're just going up, one rung of the ladder at a time to, I don't know, creative director, agency owner, whatever that looks like. And I think one of the good things about coaching as well is really getting to the heart of that, because that path isn't necessarily right for everyone, and yet sometimes we follow it anyway, just through those external forces that are telling us. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, on an unconscious level. Yeah.
No, that's so true. So as I sort of mentioned early on in the conversation, I was really hoping to get to some of the practical, really dirt level aspects of this sort of idea of creative coaching. And one of the areas that I think will be super interesting to chat about, because so many of the people who have been freelancers, and especially in the early days when you're starting out, one of the biggest challenges is, when you're speaking about your craft, you're energetic, you're in it, you're passionate about what you do. And then, usually it's at the end of the conversation, you need to start talking about money, and suddenly that confidence just shrinks, and you've got this tiny little voice, and, you start to really doubt, what you're worth. And I think that's one of the things that I was hoping we could talk a little bit about, is just about do you have any ideas or thoughts about why creatives struggle with it so much, or just some of the things that sort of surround that aspect of being a freelancer or a solopreneur?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's something that I hear very often. To be honest with you, it's one of the biggest things. It's one of the biggest barriers that people face. But I think, Alfie, with you mentioning that, it would be good to hear your experience. If you have some experience in, you said there that shrinking of confidence and stuff, I'd love to hear from you where that sort of comes from in your experience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely can. I can remember one of my early projects. So and I'll maybe speak to two of them. So my journey into the industry was a little bit windy, because I ended up dropping out of university and then starting to work. And so to actually be able to drop out of university, what I needed to do was do a little bit of freelance projects just so that I could do and put together a portfolio. And one of the things that I know, I understand about myself is conversation is something that I enjoy and something that I'm usually very strong at. And when I'm speaking about my craft, I find my confidence in my abilities. And so I can speak about, what actually makes a good website, what makes a good UI. But then as soon as I have to speak about money, it's sort of it's less about what I'm doing and more about am I going to get rejected, or am I is a client going to not see the value that I can see, and so think that I'm ripping them off. And that's something that even up to now, even though I've, sort of developed in that process, I still struggle with today. It's like as soon as we get to speaking about money, it's kind of like it becomes less about what I can do and more about, whether I'll be accepted or not. And I remember there was one project where I was actually, maybe even a different one that's a little bit more funny, was when I was in the interview for my first job. And they eventually asked me, what salary am I looking for? Now, I mean, I'd never been in an interview process before. Like, my first job was also my first interview. So I was like, I'm like, I even remember saying, I'm willing to accept whatever you could pay me. Like, even if it's 1,000 or 2,000 rand, which was even more than my traveling costs. But I was kind of like in this space where I was like, I just need to get a job, and it becomes a matter of like my self-image rather than what I'm willing, like what the worth of my work is to the organization. And it took me quite a while to actually understand that. Fortunately, the company was a good one, and they still they didn't take my very terrible initial suggestion for a salary, and they sort of gave me like a good base rate. But, I mean, even up to now when I have to speak about like finances, it always feels like I'm stepping outside of my area of expertise and my area of knowledge. And I'm also always so surprised about it when I get to that point of the conversation, because I've been confident for the whole interview or the whole conversation or the whole sort of discovery process with the client. And so, I mean, that's been my experience.
Yeah, I've been there myself. I think there are many different ways to approach this, because it really all comes down to, it's really about the self and like sort of self-worth. And I think a lot of it can be combated, if you like, by getting ahead of the conversation, by taking leadership on the solution and the meeting that you have with those clients. So when it comes to pitching, you're confident in the solution that you're putting forward, but then it starts to fall off a cliff when it comes to the money conversation. And I think one of the challenges that we have is to be confident throughout that process, to know within ourselves that what we're doing here is worth that money. And that does take practice. It takes some mindset work, but ultimately, it comes down to a real sense of self-worth and self-belief, and seeing this as simply an offer. Here is a problem that you and me and the client have articulated together. Here's a problem. Here is a solution. You can work with me if you want. I can make this happen for you. It's entirely up to you. And if you would like to work with me, this is how much it costs. And you don't even blink, because you know full well deep down that you have the stuff to deliver on that project. And yeah, it takes practice, and it takes affirming to yourself that it is worth it, because people buy from confident people. It's like, if you feel confident, they feel confident. It's a weird transfer of energy. If you come to the table, even if you have the best skills in the world, and you could build them as a system that's totally bespoke, you could do them an amazing brand guideline, set of brand assets, whatever it is, you could do all that stuff. But if you come to the table and you kind of shrunk it down, you're a little bit small, you're a bit hunched over, you're umming and ahhing a lot, those are the things that will just not instill confidence in that person. So what's interesting hearing you say that, Alfie, is that actually when you feel that your confidence is diminished in that moment, that possibly comes across as a bit of a surprise to that client, because you've been confident to that point. So yeah, I guess it's a case of just powering through and taking real ownership over what you're offering. Know that it's worth it, and see it as an offer rather than a sale. It's something that they can choose to buy rather than something that you must sell, if that helps.
Oh, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
I think something, I have no idea, I can't remember who told me this. Probably my stepdad, bless him if he's listening, a few years back, around similar concept to what you're explaining, that when you are busy negotiating a deal with either a client or a potential new employer, that you should rather view it as a matchmaking process, almost like a couple stepping into a relationship. You are both equal entities. You're not a service provider and client isn't God. You are both stepping into an equal position, and it needs to be a good match for both of you. And it's not you just throwing everything you can to their will to please them. It is you both have to, like, play this game of, this is what I can offer you. Either you kind of meet me where I'm at, because then we are equal players in this game, and starting the relationship at that point, then if that succeeds, you have mutual respect at least, and then that kind of sets the baseline for the relationship.
I completely agree with that. That is, I think you've articulated it better than I did. But yeah, I'm often doing this. If it's podcast, you won't be able to see, but we put the client on like a pedestal up here.
Yes, we do.
And we see ourselves.
Creatives.
And we see ourselves as down here, almost with the begging bowl out. Can you, I can make those website amends. I can write that article. Please give me some money to do it. When really we should be seeing it as equal. If not completely the other way around, that this client is lucky to work with you. In a way, if you can change your mindset to that, you will have your pick of the work. And to go back to the niching question of earlier, if you can make your clients' goals your own through a niche, i.e. those charities, I really want to see those charities succeed. But if a charity came to me and it didn't look like they had the stuff to make that happen, I wouldn't work with them. If they came to me and they seemed, scattered and uninspired and just not really like they were going to make the best use of my time, then I wouldn't work with them. It very rarely I think it only happened once, but yeah, that again, so niching and choosing a client whose values and objectives are very similar to your own can help with that conversation about money as well, because then it's like you say, Stephanie, it's like a relationship where you're both just wanting the same things, rather than it being sort of butting heads over some details or financial concerns.
So I guess I've got a bit of a follow-up. So one of the things that you said that's really important for a person, if they do struggle specifically about speaking about financials, is to practice. And I think that's a good piece of advice. But I think, putting myself in the mind of a listener, I guess the challenge is like, how do I practice? Like, do I practice like with real clients? Do I sort of do role playing? Like, how would you like recommend? If I was, let's say, your coaching client and we sort of saw that this was a weakness, like what kind of activities would you say to actually be able to practice that?
Honestly, I think whatever helps. Role play's cool. I've actually done that with my clients. They could do it with their partner, their friend. They could write it down like a conversational flow straight out of their head. They could actually go and have a conversation with their clients and throw themselves in the deep end. In terms of getting to that point, it's about baby steps really towards that self-belief that the change that you want to make, whatever that is, can happen. And sometimes throwing yourself in the deep end isn't always the most productive way to go about things. One thing that does help is so-called positive affirmations. So that's basically just affirming to yourself, either through your thoughts or actually verbalizing, the things that you need to hear. So things like, I am worthy. If you go into a client meeting and there's a deep set subconscious feeling that you are unworthy to be there, to do that work, to have that responsibility, to charge that money. If you feel that, it's going to come through in your entire presence. Whereas if you tell yourself, I am worthy of this work, and you really embody that, it's quite a powerful thing to do. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's important. Like, I think the thing that I really like about that is the idea of taking, sort of reducing it to the level of resolution that resonates with you, whether it's, taking the big step of like sort of doing it with a real client, or taking maybe a medium-sized step of practicing with somebody that you know and that you're comfortable with, or going as small as just simply speaking to yourself and like affirming with yourself the fact that this is something that you are worthy of. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, all these kind of little tactics, I mean, there's a whole ton of them, really, and it's about knowing what will work, for you in that moment. What I would encourage anyone who's listening to do would be to explore the world of sort of self-development and overcoming fear and understanding self-worth, because there's so much there that can teach you to unlearn a lot of the stuff that's come from our past. Like, we learn a lot from when we were young. Like, I've even spoken to people, and I identify with this really closely, people that are from a very working class background. They grew up without a lot of money, secondhand clothes, etc., cheap food. Like, they carry within them that lesson that money is like everything, and that costs need to be cut. They don't have an investment sort of mindset, and so it's really about removing all of those lessons that we learned that may have been useful when we were younger and for our family, that we're in a completely different situation to where we are now. But where you want to get to requires a whole like shift in your thinking, and so working through that stuff that you carry with you, becoming aware of it, and then challenging it is that's really the work, to be honest with you, because everything that you do in the world flows from that.
Yeah. I cannot agree more with you, Matt, and especially with the self-worth part. And I guess it takes a lot more work for us as creatives to know that, to converse business-wise in this industry, we have to put in a lot of self-work as well in order to become linguistic in business, so to say. We have to uncover more personal levels or layers of ourselves. But regarding the self-worth characteristic or topic, I think a lot of creatives, from observation and personal experience, they get into this bad cycle or trap because of the self-worth. You get maybe it's your first freelance client, and we put the client on the pedestal. So yes, I'll take anything. Cool, got the gig, but they're obviously just paying me whatever they want. Then they also treat me that way. They treat me bad because, I said I would do anything, and I keep on pleasing them. And then after that client, I got the money, but I'm not quite happy. That's not the client I want. But that's kind of the cycle that people get into. Then the next client, I do that again. And maybe that previous client, because I put that client on the pedestal, I let them disrespect me. And then I almost go to myself, flip, that proves that I should have taken less. Maybe I should have given them a discount or worked harder. And it enforces this bad cycle again. So the next client, I'm like, let me lower my price, so maybe they won't be as mean, or negotiate a little bit less. And it's just a cycle. Do you see that happening in the clients you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, do you mind, because obviously it feels like you've had some experience in this. So what's your kind of experience of this cycle?
So, like I mentioned before we started, I freelanced for about 5 years. And I think that was probably one of the hardest lessons, is to say no. Instead of thinking about, just getting every client, it's rather getting the right clients. And that was really hard in the beginning, because obviously, as I started out freelancing, you just say yes to every and any client. And that wasn't necessarily the best way to go, because you do get clients who see you as the service provider. So you should be doing everything and anything to please me, even though it's out of scope, it's not what I quoted. So I think I'm grateful to say I did get out of that cycle. Didn't last very long. I don't know if it was just the people in my life I had at the time who at least had a better view of me that helped reinforce a better or stronger self-worth at the time. But it was very hard starting to say no to people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the sort of breakthrough moment, if you can say, that switched for you to start being able to say no?
Sure. I have one memory of a freelance client who is an agency owner, small agency owner, very good negotiator, very, very good, charismatic, brilliant at what he does, swoons all his clients. And I remember just walking in and telling myself, whatever offer or hourly rate we negotiate and come to, I need to increase it. Doesn't matter if it's even the happy number I walked in mentally. And I don't know if that was a breakthrough moment, if something happened, or was it just that I walked in with a very strong intention. Rather than the intention being, I want the client, the intention was keep the promise to myself, not keep the promise to the client. So maybe that's why I remember that memory. And it was terrifying. I was sweating. It was uncomfortable. But I walked out and I said, cool. I know we discussed this, but I still want to increase the hourly rate by X. You can let me know if you're happy with that, yes or no. So again, I think if I had to say what the breakthrough was walking in with the intention not being getting the client, but rather keeping a promise to myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. Keeping a promise to yourself, setting an intention. I really love that, because we often get caught up in like results. You would think that, if I must get $80 an hour from this client or whatever it might be, otherwise I failed. Like, that's my objective. Whereas really it's not the outcomes that we actually have control over, it's our own sort of actions that we take. So yeah, it sounds like that was a really good moment for you, because you established something that you were going to do intentionally and then kept that promise to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's such a powerful thing to do. But it does start with the awareness. And I think what you said there about the cycle and the patterns that we get into, the longer it goes on as well, the harder it is to interrupt that pattern. And it's heartbreaking for me when I speak to a potential coaching client and we press on some really not deep, well, I suppose it is sort of deep stuff, really.
Yeah, it is.
And we highlight some stuff, but the fear still prevents them from taking it. Like, they won't go on to work with me, or they'll I've actually had people sort of ghost me after a conversation. I try and I'm always respectful. I ask permission, to kind of delve into some of these subjects, but sometimes it's too raw and they can't face it. So they end up just going back to behaving in exactly the same way as they always have done, because that's where the comfort zone is, and that's what they're being dragged down to. So yeah, one of the most challenging things with personal development is getting on the track and starting moving and being prepared to face those things that we've done, to try and face down the things that have been holding us where we are and get past them. That's where it begins.
Yeah. No, you I think you're definitely right. And there's another aspect of this that I think also I'd like to get a little bit of your thoughts on, because I think a lot of people will experience money as one of the more challenging aspects of the whole creative process. But I think the second one that's also tough, maybe not as tough, but maybe difficult in a different way, is one of the things I find with a lot of creative people is, plainly put, a lack of structure. You almost like you sort of just do things as they come, or like, you know, hope that inspiration strikes you and it's gonna sort of it's gonna work out the way you want it to. And you know, when you're working in maybe in the context of an agency or in the context of an organization, that structure almost gets imposed on you. You know, you've got a manager who's got specific expectations. He's gonna check in with you at these specific times. And so you almost have the ability to almost put that responsibility on somebody else. But then when you step into a freelance role or into the role of a solopreneur, all of that is on you. And it's something that I think I probably struggled with that more than I did talking about money, just because my personality does not gel very well with being structured and being orderly. And it's something that I had to work on for quite a while. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts about the sort of importance of developing that structure, or maybe things that people might be able to do in that space to help them sort of overcome that.
Yeah, I completely see where you're coming from there about stepping away from somebody else's structure into a very unstructured world. That, you know, there's no scaffolding around you, there's no framework. And it is just you as well. So you can't build it with somebody else. You have to build it yourself. And, you know, I personally think that none of that really, I mean, it matters at a certain point. You know, if you want to scale, take on staff, increase your impact, all that sort of stuff, that's when it matters, because you don't want huge gaps in the business if you're putting money and effort and investment into it. But arguably, in those first early days of solo business ownership, it comes down to the personal development stuff and working out really what's behind the drive to add structure, if that makes sense. So a couple of times now, people have come to me and they're quite young in their business, or it's a new business, and they're actually looking for an advisor. Someone to basically come in and say, this and this is you're doing that wrong, you should do it like this. And my response is always the same. It's like, I shouldn't give you advice on this. I'm not here to tell you how to run your own business. What I want to do is work through the stuff that's making you feel like you have to ask my advice, you know? So we want to break down the barrier so that they're just, I haven't got a structure, that's cool. I don't have any clients at the moment, that's cool. I don't, you know, whatever it is, you're not freaking out. So it's about building that sense of self and that confidence that it doesn't matter that you don't have all of the things figured out, because within you, you know, there's a belief there that you're on the right path. The stars will align, you know, it will come together when it happens, you know. Sure, have goals, have a vision, work towards stuff. I suppose this comes back to what Stephanie was saying a moment ago about that career trajectory in our industry of going through management up to directorship, whatever that looks like. You know, when you launch a business, you may have an idea that is implanted from the expectations of other people, from books that you've read, from your peers. This is the path that I need to take. So within, 3 months, I must have a very fixed business model, for example. And it's like, does that need to be the case? Or can you be comfortable knowing that might not be the case for a while, and that you're confident to just work on things, meet challenges as they arise? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely.
But I would say I'm not advocating not having structure. I think get to a point where, like I said, you want to grow and you want to start. I always use this analogy of the machinery of business, right? Like imagine it as a machine. When you want to start filling that with oil or fuel, whatever, you want to start putting stuff into that. It's leads, staff, growth, basically. When you want to really get that machine churning and running, that's when you do need the structure, or you could benefit from having the structure. But certainly to begin with. It's just about going with the flow, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
I do like what you said about, what is your motivation behind the structure? Because I think if we pause and question ourselves, it also helps you not feel insecure, whether there's a structure or not. Because what is your motivation? Like for Alfie, I think from me being his friend and colleague, I know his motivation is coming from him stepping into this role, wanting to make more impact. And that's why, it's important for him to find this structure that is best suited for him in his new environment. But it does start with, asking what is the motivation behind getting structures. Is it because people call me unstructured, or I'm just like this go with the flow and I'm feeling insecure about being that person? Or is it actually because it's to my benefit as well?
Yeah, and like definitely that sense of motivation behind it. So much comes down to fear, doesn't it? And a lot of people, particularly in the early days, they want to have that structure because it gives them that blanket of security that they have a business. Whereas, like I said, if you were to just read a book or get in a business advisor and they told you exactly how to put this thing together, like you could get some value from that, but it's not addressing the underlying issue, which is you're scared, and that's fine. So let's work on that to make you less scared and more confident.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think, when I think back to, earlier in my career when I was looking for all of these sort of like frameworks on what is the process of a UX designer? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And then you kind of you copy that, you maybe change the graphics a little bit, and then that's what you use to present to your clients. Because then you can almost tell yourself that, maybe I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but the person where I got this from is a professional and they know what they're doing. And it's sort of like you're trying to almost transpose their confidence into yourself. And,
Sure.
I understand why you might want to do that, especially at the early stages of your career, because you may not necessarily have that confidence yet. But I think it's what you've mentioned about addressing the confidence is actually much more important, because I think for most people, there'll come a time in your career where either your landscape changes, your maybe the niche that you're going for changes, and then you'll sort of just be in the same position if you haven't addressed it, because you're gonna have those new uncertainties. You're gonna have those fears are gonna start creeping up in a different context. And if you don't know how to address those fears, or if there isn't an existing framework for this new niche that you're in, you're sort of left high and dry. And I think it's really great that you sort of mentioned the fact that you need to address the underlying fears and uncertainties.
Yeah, I think it's getting to a point where instead of having a fear of the unknown, you're almost welcoming the unknown, and you're saying to yourself, I don't know what this is about right now, but I'm welcoming the challenge and I've got a lot to learn on the way. And I think that is a very forward momentum way of thinking, because if you just let fear take over, you won't even take on the challenge. So you won't learn, you won't experience, and you won't grow. You'll just remain where you are.
Yeah. No, definitely. And so maybe just another question. What would you say? And I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, so feel free to kind of take your own interpretation of it. But what are some of the maybe newer lessons that you've learned actually while coaching creatives? Maybe some of the conceptions that you might have had before, which have shifted, or sort of things that have changed your mindset based off of working with other creatives.
That's a good question. I think that there's a lot more fear out there than I thought. I think that's possibly, when I started the coaching business, I came to it from a mindset of people need accountability and structure. It's the kind of it's the logistical, practical, strategic stuff that they need help with. And I very, very, very quickly learned people weren't buying into that at all. And the reason for it was because here's a very thin layer of stuff there, which is accountability and structure and strategic stuff, tactical stuff. underneath that is a huge ocean of experiences, beliefs, limiting beliefs, stories that we tell ourselves. That's, coaching is about the deep dive into that, not the superficial strategic stuff. It helps with some of that. It can help to hold you accountable. But yeah, really what it's about is getting to the heart of problems. So if someone says to me, I don't make videos for YouTube or social media, for example, it's just not my thing. They probably say that to themselves and loads of people around them. Nobody ever challenges them on it because they all just think, oh, cool. They're not really interested in what this person's limiting beliefs are. So nobody ever picks them up on it. Whereas I would be like, well, hold on one moment. Let's just shine a bit of a light on that. What's making you say that doing video isn't your thing? And then we have a real conversation. If they're open to it, the conversation will become meaningful and a breakthrough can occur, a realization. But yeah, so I think the biggest not mindset shift, but the biggest realization for me and the thing that I've learned the most is that, wow, there's a lot of people out there who were really where I was 5 years ago. And that's fine. It just means that my mission is bigger and my task is bigger as well, which is fine. I'm up for it, right? Let's bring it on. But yeah, but also when I set up working with charities 4 or 5 years ago, I had I'd come to a place where I wasn't working with just anyone anymore. I had a niche, I had a bit of a business model, and I was ambitious and I knew broadly what I wanted to achieve. I didn't have any of the personal development stuff. So if somebody who was a coach dropped into my inbox on LinkedIn or sent me an email at that point in my life and said, do you want to have a chat about how I can help you with some of this stuff? I would have bitten their hand off. I would have been like, absolutely, this is exactly. But I wasn't of the mindset to look for a coach. So I didn't know such a thing existed, really. I didn't know how they could help me. Just somebody came to me. So I see myself now as the person who could come along at the right time for those people that need it. And I have done. The clients that I have now, it's just the stars have aligned. They've realized I needed to make a change. I've been the guy that's asked them the right questions at the right time, and they've enrolled to work with me, and we're already seeing amazing results.
That's amazing. There was a question I had in my head just now, and it's just left me. Oh yes. So you sort of mentioned that if you'd kind of come across this 5 years ago, it would have been something that would have caught your interest. And you mentioned the fact that it's not something that you knew existed. And when you and I initially connected, that's something that I said to you. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a creative coach. So are there things that, I don't know if this is even a question that you can answer, but things that are, if I'm a freelance creative and I feel like there are aspects that I'm not satisfied with, things that I could look out for in myself that might indicate that freelance coaching is something that would be useful for me, or something that could take me to the next level. How might I look a little bit into myself to see that actually maybe this is something that can help?
Yeah, that is a really good question. That introspection, there are so many answers. I'm just trying to think what the easiest way into this could be, and I suppose it would be to write down on a bit of paper or on your phone or whatever the kind of perceived weaknesses that you have about yourself, or if it's easier to write down all of the bad experiences that you've had, or any opportunities that you feel like you've missed, any regrets that you have, and really examine your past and who you are now, to see laid out on a piece of paper where those gaps are, where those holes are in you as a person and in your business. And I think if you did that, that would give you a good grounding, because one of the first things I ask people who are potentially interested in working with me is what is it that you're looking to get out of this relationship? Like, how, you know, from working with me, where do you want to get to? And just that question itself can unlock, you know, a lot of stuff that may have not been conscious, because, you know, people in general aren't taught to listen and question and sit with people, sit with their hesitations and stuff. Even the best, even if you've got the best partner in the world, like your girlfriend or whatever, like, I mean, my partner, she's a trained counsellor, so she's very good at listening and she's very good at challenging. Whereas I think all of my other relationships, it sounds a negative thing to say, but it's quite superficial. So we don't question our friends on a deep level. And if we do, it's so that we can give our opinion and our advice, isn't it? That's what we do. We just give our advice. I think that you should do this. No, I think you should do that. And what coaching is about is really listening, and not just listening, but asking the questions that can help them to see something that is there that they can't currently see. And no one's trained for this in society, so no one experiences this. So to start the conversation, Alfie, I think, it starts by asking yourself those questions, and then talking to a coach. Most coaches do like free discovery calls and that sort of thing, where what they're looking for and what I'm looking for in them calls is, you know, enough stuff to work with and a potential breakthrough in that moment where someone goes, oh, do you know what? You're right there, or, you know, what you've made me realize is X, Y, and Z. I'm doing this because, or I always do that and I would like to do this instead. And when you can get to that point, that's when things start to get more exciting, because you begin to realize that those patterns can be interrupted. Those blockers that you see right there that are getting in the way, they can be moved out of the way. And so it's a lot of it's about inspiration. So it's about inspiring yourself as well as asking the questions and challenging yourself. It's about getting excited again about what's possible for you.
It's amazing.
You know, Matt, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think we're almost going to wrap it up, but I'm just sitting here thinking what I've gained from this. And it's been so nice taking moments to reflect on my own journey and just appreciate some small moments or pivots or growth moments in my own career, and then also just helping me see or expose opportunities that are still there for awareness. And I'm sure Alfie and the listeners will feel the same. It's been so amazing. It's always good to take a moment to reflect, because it helps us to firstly appreciate, and reflection also then helps us to be more kind to ourselves when we look to the future and identify where's growth needed.
Yeah, definitely. It's that reflection, isn't it? And also like having some kindness towards yourself as well, like you said there, because it's very easy to look back at some of those, I guess you may label them as mistakes, but you know, there is no such thing as failure if there's a learning experience there. That is just genuinely true. So thank you for having me on. And it's amazing that you two are both putting together this podcast and sharing some of this stuff as well with the sector. Thank you.
And maybe one last question. If people want to find you, they want to chat to you, they desperately want you to coach them, where can they find you?
The first port of call would be my LinkedIn profile, actually. You know, having been a web designer for 15 years, it's weird saying that, but I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you just search me on there, you'll find me. But I've also got a website, which is mattsaunders.uk. Ironically, it's currently out of date, but I'm working on that. But yeah, certainly either send me a message through there or send me a message on LinkedIn.
Amazing. There you have it, guys. And thanks for everyone listening. And remember to go have a check at our social. We do post some announcements of new episodes and new guests, as well as some resources from our episodes.
Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers and thank you. Bye.